Hey everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. Thanks so much for joining me. Today I'm speaking with Allan Steele. Allan, welcome.
Good morning, Dan. Thank you very much.
Good to see you. Good to have you on the show. We're going to be talking all things coaching and maybe some technical directorship and leading from top down. But before we do that, let's start where we always start. Tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us about your work.
Thank you, Dan. So I am a 41-year-old dad of two. My two little girls are 4 and 7. Um, Live just north of Reading. And my recent experiences has been as director of football at Forest Green and technical lead at Brentford. How I got into that, I decided very early. So I've always loved sport, always loved football. Um, Decided very early that probably professional sport wasn't my thing with regards to an athlete, but then went into teaching. So I came from a good Irish family that mum said that I had to have a profession or a trade. So I went down the route of being a teacher, um, trained as a teacher, and then went into when I was teaching, realised that actually there was all these different worlds of kind of coaching and specifying into sports. So I did that, but I did that with sports away from the traditional ones. So I kind of looked at football, rugby, cricket and said, well, I've played those all my life. So I actually then went into dance and basketball, badminton, martial arts. So I wanted to kind of turn up to a school environment and not fear any discipline. I wanted to make sure that I was able to do something at every level. So one of the sports I took most seriously was hockey. Played hockey at university for kind of 3 years. Found that actually there was a lot of crossover between football and hockey. So I played in goal for hockey and was really quite lucky with a group of players who I played with at university. They were highly talented international players, and they thought that I was all right to smash a hockey ball at for a prolonged period of time. Um, but then also during that time, what I realised was that those coaching courses, you can really start to drill down into the finer detail of each sport. So I left university, started teaching, and that's when I started my coaching journey. So started with kind of my level one, level two, um, B license in the UK, and then realised that I wanted to try and take that further. So I moved to America. We started a football club in America. We moved to Los Angeles and um, met a few people over there. An American gentleman called Bob who had the vision of starting a football club, and I met another English guy called Adam and a Brazilian guy called Talis. And between the four of us, we started a football club that's actually doing really well, still going strong in Los Angeles at the moment, probably over 100 teams and semi-professional teams as well. So yeah, no, really proud of that. But I wanted to try and push on from a um, football perspective and look for something else that could push me out of my comfort zone. So I moved to Madrid. And at the time, Madrid, Spain had just won a World Cup, just won the Euros. So this was now 2011. And at that time, me, who'd been a really quite confident and bold coach over in the States, moved to Spain and very quickly got humbled and got told, why do we need you? Um, I couldn't find a good answer at the time. So my time in Spain was amazing because I got to jump around loads of different clubs. Was lucky enough to bump into Paul Clement very early when I moved to Madrid, who was really kind and invited me into Real Madrid at the time. He had just started there. So Rayo Vallecano were a club who had an open door policy to training sessions. So spent a load of time there. And then I met a gentleman called Neil who ran FC Britannico, so I managed to spend some time playing and coaching as well in their kind of semi-pro leagues. So 3 years in Spain, and decided I wanted to take a trip over back to the UK. So put my CV around some different clubs in the UK, and Brentford were one who 10 years ago, so it's 2014. Brentford were one who wanted a conversation, and very lucky to bump into Ozzy Abanji and Stuart English at the time, who offered me a role there. So I worked there for 9 years, various different positions from being in the academy, education and welfare, then moved across to the B team and got spent loads of time with Rob Rowan and Kev O'Connor, and um, obviously the time I spent with Rob was massively inspirational. And um, yeah, as a man that we lost way too early, but always tried to do things in his kind of style, but also try to follow through on a vision that he had to create a development model within the B team that was unique, and drove some change within the development, uh, with regards to developing players, and developing people, and then that evolved over the last kind of 3 years, where Brentford got promoted to the Premier League and then needed to restart an academy. So I led that project, with Amish, under the direction of Phil Giles, and spent the time working with Rasmus and Lee Dykes over the last kind of 5 years to see how football clubs ran and what was the best thing we needed to do to build the academy of the future. Then that led me over the last year to then be offered the role at Forest Green as director of football. And yeah, really lucky there that I was trusted to implement some new recruitment models, um, organisational structure, facilities. So yeah, and unfortunately just left there recently. So yeah, had a good time.
Some really interesting roles that you've had, some interesting directions that you've taken, Alan. And I'm keen to explore everything that you've experienced. I think what taps my curiosity, first of all, is your experiences in three different countries. Obviously, in the UK, being English yourself, but then the move to America, and then the move to Spain, and then back to the UK. Three different cultures. Would you be able to, in any way, neatly and succinctly sum up the differences in those cultures when it comes to coaching? Did you notice any obvious differences, and maybe similarities?
Yeah, coaching in those three. So I was really lucky to do coaching courses in all three countries.
Okay.
So I've done my B license and pro license in the UK. I did my B license in Spain. I did a B license and youth license in America. So not only have I had a chance to coach in those countries, but also see their coach education as well. And then I also did an A license in Ireland, so I had a different perspective on that as well. So I would say that the big differences between the three, um, probably come down to resource, um, and culturally, the way a coach is seen in America is completely different how a coach is seen, I think, in Spain and the UK. So coaching in America across any different sport, I think, is seen as such a figurehead, that the sports are willing to invest in you from such a young age. Coaches are getting paid a tremendous amount of money to develop players at such a young age in the US. And you go to Spain, not a chance. Is that happening? Even outside of the top clubs, most jobs are part time. So where I moved across from Spain and said, well, let's look at this, or to Spain, sorry, and move there as a coach who was getting paid, to Spain, where you're going to do this for free for as long as you can, and then you might get a part time job. I was working and met loads of coaches from around Madrid part time working in their academy, who all had extra jobs. And there's me thinking this is the biggest club in the world, and yet all their staff are part time. It's only when you get up to the older age groups you start to become full time. And then in the UK, I think there's in that same time over that kind of 10-year period, there was quite a bit of a shift where coaches started to become compensated, especially with the EPPP. So actually, there was more coaching positions in the UK, compared to Spain, but then America compared to UK was just there was an infinite amount of opportunities over there. So I think that was one big thing, was the resource that was put behind coaches. Um, but then culturally, um, in Spain, and the UK probably are more aligned, that actually coaching and the sport was more ingrained in the culture. Therefore, there were far more opportunities to work at a higher level and to also volunteer at a higher level. So your exposure to top level coaches, to top level players, I think was more frequent in Europe than it was in the
Mm.
US. But what I've seen recently, and I went back to the US for the first time kind of in 15 years a few weeks ago, the shift and the change with the MLS, the USL, the NWSL. There are now so many more opportunities in the US, and also so much more resource gone into the coaching, that actually they are on a very, very fast trajectory to catch up with Europe.
I find that juxtaposition between coaches in Spain being essentially either volunteer or part-time, with the notion that, let's face it, over the past 2 decades, you can't go far wrong by saying certainly Spain have been domestically and internationally have produced some of the best footballers, the best football teams. And yet, so I just think that's a fascinating juxtaposition. Was there any clues that you detected as to why this country could be so successful at developing players, at developing teams, and yet the infrastructure suggests that that couldn't be possible, at least the coaching infrastructure?
Yeah, I think the coaching infrastructure is really interesting because you could get a pro license in Spain for under €1,500,
Okay.
and the frequency of the courses, and the popularity of courses, and so many different avenues to actually get your pro license over there. There are more pro license coaches than I've ever seen, which is really interesting. But actually, another way I kind of always compared the three areas was US seemed to have a real drive and passion for athletic side of the game.
Hmm.
The Spanish were heavily technically based,
Okay.
with a real heavy element tactically,
Okay.
and then the UK seemed to be a really nice combination of all.
Hmm.
And I think a lot of it came down to um, the the way that younger players are brought up in the country. So in America, most of the players, there's loads of soccer players in Southern California, but actually, who are their role models? If you look at it over the last 10, 15, 20 years, not many people would really want to grow up to be a professional soccer player in the States. Because by the time you get to 13, 14, 15, you get the opportunity to go play American football, baseball, basketball, and the best athletes will often transition to those games. In Spain, what I noticed was you had this really, really smart kind of development model that was quite organic in the fact that they play small-sided games on hard courts, and the futsal kind of culture was there at a younger age, and there's a really nice kind of steady progression into seven-a-side, nine-a-side, and then into 11-a-side football as you grow up, and you transition off of hard courts onto AstroTurf and then onto grass. So as you get more kind of exposure to the game, and you get more and more influences, you then start to become kind of more ingrained in a different style of the game. So you start off with futsal, then you move on to your small sided on Astro, and then you go on to your 11 side on grass. So actually, being in Spain, naturally, their kind of culture of football, most people say, well, this is how Spain developed players. This is what Spanish players look like. I think a lot of it comes from the football system that's in place, but they have that kind of succinct development model, but also role models within the country that you'd want to aspire to be. And then in the UK, I think you've kind of started to see that develop over the last 10, 15 years, but still, you probably only recently where you've seen that rise of AstroTurf pitches where you can consistently play at a younger age group, where I still know a lot of clubs will be playing on grass. Now, there's no issues with playing on grass, but actually you lose a lot of consistency with that. You probably lose a lot of um, games through the weather. So actually, that kind of constant and consistent method of developing players probably isn't here in the UK as of yet.
It strikes me, listening to what you're saying and knowing what I know about this landscape, the socio-cultural landscape in Spain lends itself towards the development of the the perceptual cognitive, putting my psychologist's cap on here, the
Mm.
perceptual cognitive side of the game, which is obviously linked to anticipation and decision making, scanning behavior, but with that, a sense of game intelligence, a sense of game understanding. And I think what's interesting here is that it's easy to look at that. It's easy to look at that socio-cultural landscape in Spain and go, well, okay, let's lift that and let's take that to the state of New York, for example, or the northeast of America, and let's just insert it there. But it strikes me that there's something more subtle at play, some kind of socio-historical perspective that means that just simply lifting that and then taking it somewhere else doesn't quite fit. You're not going to quite produce the same players, and whether that's, as you mentioned, the role models, that combined with the athleticism, I just think it's interesting that it's not necessarily that you can simply lift a culture, put it somewhere else, and the outcomes will be the same.
I totally agree. And I think a lot of what probably I did when I first moved to Spain was, sorry, when I first moved to America was, so this worked in the UK, this should work in
Mm,
America. So,
mm,
when I went across to America, you look and none of the leagues have promotion and relegation. And you look at that and go, oh, put promotion and relegation in, you have a great product in America. You won't, because you don't have it in the NBA, you don't have it in the NFL. So why do you need it in the MLS? Well, it's good for excitement and it fits our culture unbelievably because that's the way we've been brought up and that's been ingrained in what we know and what we do. But it's not ingrained in the American psyche. So therefore, what is actually building these big franchises is building big businesses, but actually really supporting players with the best possible facilities, coaches, resources. And I've always been, you know, amazed by actually the quality of and let's take this example, sports psychology over in the States, the way they work with younger players, just incredible. And universities, those universities, I was lucky enough to go into USC and UCLA and Stanford over the past few weeks. The support they get on every single level of the game is incredible. So, that's where they are. They are at the cutting edge of what they do. That might not work for us. So I think at the moment, what they've got is that they're making the best of who they are and what they are, and I think they're not far off from being really, really successful longer term. But I don't think, as you say, picking something up and moving it across to another country is guaranteed to work.
You returned to England from Spain and won a position at Brentford Football Club, which I think is fascinating because, or their trajectory has been fascinating. And, respecting what you can and can't speak about, what is proprietary and what isn't. When you walked into the building, were there any clues? Was there? It sounds to me like you walked into the building when they were still a Championship side, so they weren't quite in the Premier League.
League One.
League One. They were in League One, so they were moving up. So you were very much there from pretty much the beginnings of their adventure, from going from sort of League Two, League One, right away through to the Premier League. So, well, you would have seen the clues unfold as you were involved, and obviously, as you said, you were involved more at an academy level. But when you looked around the building, when you looked around Brentford Football Club, what were the kind of the things that were emerging that played a part in the ascendancy of the club?
Um, I think it's quite an easy answer on this one,
Okay.
and it comes down to the owner. It comes down to the directors he had around him, and the vision of the football club. And they were willing to stick to that over a longer period of time. And that, I think Brentford are probably a story of success. And it's not linear, of course, we know, but you probably look at it over the last 10 years and say that they've had a dotted line from League One up towards the Premier League, which has been amazing. But if you spread that out over a 100-year period, it's not been like that. If you spread that out over 15 years, it's not been like that. So I think the snapshot,
Yeah.
and I'm really lucky to start there in 2014 when we were in League One with a Cat 2 academy, which was incredible, and and I'll speak about that in a moment. But actually, what happened was Matthew Benham came and said, "This is what I want to do." And you look at the people who were around him, in Cliff, the chairman, and Nitty, Phil Giles, Rasmus Ankerson, those guys being around him at that time, developed that club with a clear vision of what they wanted to achieve and how they wanted to achieve it, and would have tweaked and adapted it, but they stuck to it. So I think the answer is in the leadership and in the vision.
So success is very much a top-down phenomenon.
Um, I wouldn't say that the success was solely down to that, but I think that's what it needed to trigger what was happening at the football club. Because you can also look at every single part of it, and I'll take the academy as an example. When I walked in there, Ozzy Banji had led that academy to be one of the best in the country on very limited resources with limited facilities, and that was growing. So actually, I think those seeds were already planted, and it was the people who were working within that environment that led it to be successful. So although the vision came from the top, it was all of those people and unbelievable people who were in that club at that time who were able to take it to where it is now.
I was going to say the contents of the vision need to be right, don't they? And then the execution of the processes related to the content of that vision. Surely that's the magic dust.
Yeah, I agree. And I think if you took a snapshot now of the people who were working at that club at that time, and again I mentioned Ozzy Abanji earlier, but the way he led that group, Stuart English, and what he's gone on to achieve, John D'Souza, Miguel Rios, Anthony Hayes, yeah, Aziz. There's so many people. Gabe Flores, so many people who are in there. Dan Wright, I know he's in at Brighton now. There was a group of unbelievable people who were brought into that football club to lead that stage of the academy, and I was only there to see 2 years of that. But what were the constituent parts that actually made that successful were probably similar to what made the club successful, and it was with very clear and strong leadership, bringing together some elite members of staff with elite players, and then everybody had a drive to succeed and get better. Now, there was always a carrot of better facilities, and that was always delivered. There was always a carrot of success and saying, actually, if you do well in this, you are going to progress. And those who were able to do so in that environment could go on to succeed. And that was visible and evident.
What was your position at Brentford?
So I started as academy coach, um, and was coaching within the BTEC program, went to education and welfare manager and academy coach, and then was assistant coach in the B team, and then finished up as technical lead.
And when you reflect on being a coach, what was and I suppose still is important to you as a coach? When you think about coaching, what are the first things that you think about?
Um, Probably an easy and obvious one is actually connection with those players.
Why is that first?
Um, I think if you're talking about younger players and probably older players as well, you're not just going into a football club to play football. You're going in to be part of something. So when a player turns up, it's never just the player. It's a younger brother, an older brother, a younger sister, older sister. There's parents, there's grandparents. So when they come in, you need to feel that every single part of that person and me as a coach are on the same wavelength. We're connected so that when I'm having a conversation with a player, that's going to be supported by the family. And when the family are having a conversation with the player, it's they connect with it as well. For younger players, it's what they do at school. You need to have that connection as well. So I think to look at a player as a person and to understand that actually we need to be aligned on a number of areas first. That for me is really, really key.
Was there anything that you were doing to connect with a player?
Um, I think in different roles, it kind of took different guises.
Okay.
So uh, towards the end, a technical lead, um, or as an assistant coach, you spend more time with the player and the agent more than anything. So I think there it's about talking, communication, spending time with each other. Um, when the younger players, you're probably spending more time with parents and family. So again, it's inviting them into your environment, making sure they see what you do. So I think being really, really open with what you're doing, why you're doing it, being really, really clear. So I think that one piece there for me is communication, making sure that you communicate on multiple different levels through different means as much as possible to make sure that everybody is aligned on what you're trying to achieve and why you're trying to achieve it.
You've you've mentioned a lot of people within that environment at Brentford who made the academy what it is and made the club what it is and what it's become. You talk about the importance of connection within coaching, and I think we talk about connection a lot. But I know that it's not easy to establish connection, in part because not everybody wants to feel connected with you as a coach. When you reflect back on your coaching and when you consider your coaching now, how do you deal with players who aren't necessarily oriented towards connecting with their coach? Maybe they're somebody who is slightly disagreeable or distant, has a personality that lends itself to individuality. Uh, can you think back on any players that you experienced who are a little bit more that way inclined, and how you as a coach dealt with those players?
Um, yeah, loads of examples, loads of examples. I won't mention too many names,
No, no, no.
but yeah, it's more for me to kind of hold myself back on that. Um, but yeah, loads of players who I would think about with this as an example, and I, I, the way we communicate with players, I think, is key, and the way that we communicate with the families is key, and understanding that player takes weeks and months, but actually to get to that point, I think it just drives from really simple conversations and shared experiences. So if there is a player who is more distant, if there's a player who doesn't want to engage as much, well, if I keep battering the same door, I'm going to lose. So I think at that point it would be more for me to look around it, and perhaps it's not me that needs to connect with that player. Perhaps it's another player. Perhaps it's not me that needs to be the one that drives that. Perhaps it comes from their social environment. And for me, it's about understanding that person and find out where those connections are best. And for want of a better word, start to manipulate those situations to guide that player down the path that I believe is best, but also understanding the path that they think is best. Because there could be a clash between what I believe and what they believe. There could be some sort of cultural barriers. There could be some sort of belief system in place that what I believe and what they believe is different. So I think it's really understanding all of those different parts of that player and that person before you can establish that connection. And if someone is more distant, then fine. How can I find a way of allowing that person to be themselves, but taking them on the journey with us?
Do you think it's possible to connect with every player, or do you think there's always going to be some players who escape our connection grasp, if you like?
I can connect with every person.
Okay.
Um, I really do, and I think my reasoning for saying that comes from working across in Spain, where I wasn't able to master the language quickly. and I had to find ways of connecting with people without using language, and that was tough, but achievable. And once I had broken down that language barrier, it became a lot easier. But I do believe you can connect with everybody. It's just on the level of connection that you have, and perhaps therefore, how long it takes you to build that connection. Also,
I'm really curious about that. How did you connect with players when you didn't speak their language?
um, so I think a lot is said around how I spoke and the tone of what I did. Um,
Okay.
I think the way you communicate through body language, I think was really, really important. Um, but also having the time with that person and those shared experiences. So if I was to say, I'm banging my head against the wall here, I can't communicate with this person because I don't speak the same language, and I give up and then just allow that person to be on the side, they're going to notice that. Whereas if I go the other route and say, okay, right, I've tried that way, fine. I need someone to translate. Okay, I'll get that person nearby and help me to translate. Fine, I'll put some bits and pieces down into a video. Right, I'll do that. Like this one will be a little presentation. Right, let's go get the tactics board through. I might have my phone next to me and use Google Translate. There will be a way, as long as I keep trying, as long as I keep trying to achieve that, that I can communicate with that person. But ultimately, the tone of what I do, the amount of time I spend doing what I do, and also um, making sure that when I do approach them and I am in their presence, my body language as well is welcoming, and making sure that they see that I care.
I think that's really interesting. And thanks for sharing that, because I think it's easy to underestimate the style in which you deliver something can make an impact to your connection with somebody. It's not just the content. And when you can't necessarily deliver the content in the fashion that you'd like to, as in you don't speak their language, actually you're going to start paying attention to small details like your body language, like your tone, which you're exerting some pressure on yourself to align with what you think is going to be the best way to actually establish a connection with them. I think that that's something that's so easy to underestimate or just not bother to pay attention to.
Yeah, I think I always go back to one example. I got challenged by a tutor, um, Jim Kelman, when I did a course. My B license, I must have been 23, 24, maybe even younger, and they told me I was talking too much. So I did the whole of my assessment in silence because I didn't want that criticism. So yeah, he thought I was a bit nuts for doing it, but actually, by going through that process of saying I'm going to remove my voice from my coaching practice, and I did this in the UK and did the whole thing in silence. I had to learn how to use my whistle. I had to learn how to use my body. I had to, becoming physical with a player and actually putting them in certain positions, um, demonstrating and highlighting that. But I think people will learn how to communicate in different ways, and it's really interesting to see how different people do that. And that's what I've tried to learn from. Try to learn from removing some of those senses to actually then be stronger in others.
He didn't think you were being sarcastic, did he, when you, when you tried to do that?
Potentially, luckily I passed. So I was all right.
Coming back to your position at Brentford and your experiences at Brentford, um, so connection was important, and I'm sorry, I wanted to do a bit of a deeper dive there, so I cut you off on the kind of factors that you think are important in coaching. So please excuse me. Connection is one. Bringing you back to this, what else? What else is important when you think of coaching?
Yeah, so I've kind of three, four big things that really jump out for me. So that sense of connection and belonging is key.
Mm.
Making that person feel comfortable in the environment, making sure that they are part of your environment, embedded in your environment. Really, really, really key. Um, but then also you have to provide the best possible environment for talent development, and can't have any excuses in that. You have to make sure that you are doing everything across every discipline, using the whole multidisciplinary team to deliver talent development at the absolute elite level. because these are elite sportsmen and women that you're dealing with. And then the last thing for me that's really, really key in the way that I see coaching is providing a level of autonomy, because ultimately that's what you want to see on the pitch. You want to see players be able to do these things and you not have to say a word. That's probably the point when you've cracked it. But if you don't do that within your coaching and you don't do that within your kind of leadership, I don't think you'll see that on the pitch.
That's really interesting because, on the one hand, you've spoken about creating as robust and dynamic talent development environment that incorporates a multidisciplinary team. And you saying that makes me think about knowledge, increasing player knowledge, information, giving players the best opportunity to be the best that they can be through your coaching practice. And then you speak about autonomy. Do you feel, have you experienced any tension between those two areas? On the one hand, talent development environment with all of the information that you can get across to players, multidisciplinary team, that holistic, integrated approach, again with loads of information, and then autonomy on the other side. Do you feel that they face each other, or do you feel they face away and they have to be managed?
Um, I think it's tricky in the sense if you hang your hat on one or the other. Um, because if
Okay.
you go down one route and say, yeah, I'm just going to let the game be the teacher, I'm just going to allow players to make their own decisions and then stand back, then funny enough, if you go to the States and you're being paid handsomely as a coach and you're doing that, they're going to call you out pretty quickly. And then on the other side of it, you want to prove your worth as a coach or as an educator, and you want to make sure you're trying to impart that information and knowledge. But I think what this comes down to is how do you push on a player to be able to perform and reach and exceed their potential. And I think once you understand that bit, and my belief on that, and what I'm still learning about at the moment is actually this will come down to the player finding their way, and it's up for me to guide them through that. So if I can do that in the right way, then I hopefully will provide that sense of um, autonomy, but actually being able to provide the best possible experiences I can, and using my knowledge to give those players those experiences and be autonomous in those environments.
That's really interesting. So you're a guide. I'm watching you be a guide. What do I see?
Um, I think if you're watching me going, you probably see me start with my kids first, and then me trying to roll that out into a wider group later on because I practice with the kids and probably get it wrong there first. I think the guiding for me is allowing them to do things first. So if I buy something from IKEA, is actually put it in front of the girls, allow them to try and build it. No instructions, just let them try. And then when they start to struggle, then just check, make sure do they have all the right tools? Have they got all the right parts out? Have they organised themselves properly? And just maybe nudge them down that route. And then when they've had another try and they've still not achieved, or they start to experience some success, then maybe just drop the instructions in front of them and see if they can kind of get that. And I think once they've achieved a little bit more, and they start to feel that success, and they start to feel good about it as well, and they're enjoying what they're doing. Make sure that again there's that next bit. Now they might be looking at me for a little bit more kind of instruction on how to deal with those things. So I think it would take various different forms because there might be a bit as well when they're building a big cupboard. They might need me to come and hold the sides while they're getting the screwdriver. But I think it's about being in that environment, having the right tools, allowing them the space to perform the things that they need to perform, but also for me to observe and recall that later on. Because there may be something that they did. They might have picked up a screwdriver in the wrong way, or they might have been very dangerous when they were doing that, and just taking them down a path and saying, when you did that, tell me why you did that. And when you held that thing in that way, or when you performed that technique in that way, what did that feel like to you? And next time, I'm just going to put you through taking that out, and now I'm going to put you in a different environment that's just going to work on those techniques of how to use a screwdriver properly, and then add in those constraints to actually force them to use a screwdriver in a certain way and allow them to try and work it out.
So I love that analogy. And I sit here can certainly picture this with reference to an on the grass sporting environment. Could you, and feel free to use a real life experience, but could you draw that in our minds when it comes to on the football pitch, guiding players?
Yeah, completely. And I think if we go to an elite environment now, you've got some senior pros who are able to deliver on the biggest stage, at the biggest moments. Well, are they the ones who have been in the training ground that week, developing their set piece routines and feeling connected to what you're trying to achieve? Are they the ones who have watched hours of games footage and said, right, this is what we're going to do this week when we're playing this team? Now, I think the analysis of football matches and then players being able to then turn that into training sessions and then ultimately delivering it on the football pitch, I think is really, really key. And that's probably something that I've seen that was done really, really well at Brentford, but I think it's been done across sports and especially rugby really, really well. In the fact that a group of players are sat in a room on a Tuesday and are given some match footage of the team they're about to face on the Saturday. But what footage they're actually given is key because that now is you are guiding them down a certain path. If you give them 5 clips and you really want them to focus on defending, in wide areas and stopping crosses, well, let's give them a load of clips of them crossing the ball. Let's just don't give them the full game. So you start to take them down the path, allow them to be the ones who are fully invested in what they're doing, who have then, from those video clips, created a training session or part of a training session that they feel is going to help them stop those crosses, or even tweaked the formation as well to say, actually, if we do this, and then I suppose one of the things is you could even tweak the personnel within that formation. And do you give them the autonomy and do you give them the ability to have input in that? Is there a captain's group that potentially could have that conversation and say, look, I think this might be a game that's better suited to X as opposed to Y? So yeah, I've seen it happen, and yeah, examples are pretty real of what I've seen and how I've done things before.
I was going to say, because you mentioned rugby earlier, I've been in both environments at the very highest level, and I would definitely say that at least my experience in rugby has been that. I mean, it's easy to use these terms player centered and player led, and they can be a bit vague. But if I was to use those terms, I would suggest that the coaching is much more not completely player led by any stretch of the imagination, but certainly some aspects of game preparation are player led, in akin to what you've just described. Essentially, here's some footage. Okay, players, here's you in your groups. Go away and start problem solving and solution finding around how you're going to deal with the opposition in these moments. Whereas perhaps football coaching is delivered more from a top-down lens. What you're saying is you have been in some environments where football has done what rugby tends to do, is what I'm hearing you say.
Indeed. So I think Thomas Frank at Brentford and the way he kind of led um, his coaches and that group of staff, but also when Kev O'Connor especially ran and led the B team, you could see that within how they wanted to be able to empower the players. But also, I think it kind of goes back to something you mentioned earlier about how do you create that sense of connection and belonging, or it's making them a part of what you're doing. Um, so yeah, the environments that I've been in and the ones that I really believe in are that. But I think there's kind of a big overarching piece, and again, to link back to something you mentioned earlier around what does this look like? Well, I think if a club are really, really clear on the culture that they want to try and create, I think if they're really, really clear on the values they want to see instilled in the players, but also what their staff members deliver, and then through that, how their style of play comes out, I think all of those things become a lot easier because you've then recruited people into that model, and you've actually it's you don't have to fight against those people. They are people who are coming in who believe in the same things you believe in, and if culturally that's what you do, and that's what you've done for a number of years, working for Thomas Frank would be easy because he's got infinite amount of knowledge and experience and is able to deliver in multiple different ways. But the coaches he works with and the people he works with and the players he works with all understand how this is going to get delivered and why it's going to get delivered in that way, because ultimately it drives the best out of the people that are around him.
You see, this is very interesting, and I don't want to be guilty here as a host of darting around all over the place, but building on what you've just said there, and I suppose a question to you, and please answer in any way that you feel comfortable sharing here, but I've always perceived Brentford to be aligned with exactly what you're saying, a club that tends to be organisation led, and you use the term culture there. What we say and what we do is how I would define culture. And what we say and what we do is more autonomy supportive. We are going to have a head coach or a manager, if you want to use that description, who is going to be more autonomy supportive. That is what we do here. That seems to be where a club like Brentford are at, whereas the traditional model in football tends to be, from an organisation perspective, that we allow our head coach or our manager to lead on that side of things, on what might be described as the football side of things. Again, a very broad brush statement here, but historically we might look at the Sir Alex Ferguson model there, for example. I might struggle to create a question here, but listening to what I've just said there, does that resonate with you? Would I be correct in saying that that's kind of Brentford's approach, and thus the next coach is going to be, and a next head coach, whenever that is, would be in a similar mold? That is what the club want.
Yeah, I totally understand kind of the question and what you're asking, and out of respect for the football club, obviously, I won't be able to say with 100% clarity on what they would want and how they're going to do this going forward.
Of
But what I
course.
would say from my experience there, um, I look at that again. I go back to that leadership and the alignment. So if I take Phil Giles and John Varney and the way that they're aligned completely with regards to how the club's run, but also there's a challenge there between the two of them. And there's a challenge to the board and there's a challenge to each of those individuals in key leadership positions. If I take that same approach and say, well, the next person or the current person, Thomas Frank, is that head coach, but actually the same thing has to apply to the way that they lead and the way they create that sense of autonomy and empowerment with their staff just as much as they will the players. So where they see those values in Thomas sees the same values in the leadership, and therefore he will be heavily involved, and if not, a real heavy decision maker on things like recruitment and style of play and the way that the club's delivered from a high performance perspective. So actually, all of those people who are involved and all of those constituent parts are all made to feel that they are a massive cog in this football club and that everybody has that part to play in its success. So I think that this is it's a cultural thing. It's across the football club to ensure that that's the way it's led, and that's also the way that people feel a part of the football club. So to kind of draw an alignment between a more traditional model in Sir Alex Ferguson, the way he led that football club for a number of years with huge success, and then how I see and I worked at Brentford and how that was led with huge success. Um, I think either way will can create good results um, if each of the constituent parts then are driven at the highest standard. And so Alex was able to drive his recruitment and his elite performance environment and his probably personal development and his staff development at the highest level. Now, Phil, Matthew Benham, the John Varney, the group now at Brentford can do that themselves in that their own unique way, but they're all striving for that. They're all trying to get to the absolute pinnacle of the sport.
Listening to what you're saying, a number of C words are coming through to me, like clarity and consistency, and I suppose using that word connection again, connection of constituent parts. I really like that idea. Sort of cross-departmental cohesion, I think, is absolutely vital. I suppose an overarching word coming through to me is a word that's become very important in my own practice as a sports psychologist, and that's the word ownership. Allowing Whether it's allowing your people, if they're staff members within a large organization, to have a form of ownership of the organization, or to feel that they can really take part within the decision making of the organization. They have a piece of ownership there. And returning to this potential tension between having a talent development environment that is world class and is obviously imparting information, knowledge on its people, its players, but again giving them autonomy. That potential tension between the two. And when we think about ownership, we want to, I suppose, autonomy comes in here when we want players to feel they have ownership of their game. And that makes inherent sense to me. And again, it's something that I'm trying to chip away at with my clients, whether that's from a mindset perspective, a traditional mindset perspective, but also from a learning perspective. I want my clients to believe that or to build the skills of being great learners, have great mental skills, and so on and so forth. But I suppose where I'm coming to here is, let's go back to challenging players, or players who could be perceived as challenging, and probably challenging this idea of autonomy. You must have come across players in these environments who just said, "Hey man, just tell me what to do. Just tell me. I'll do it. I'm good. I've got ability in my feet. I've got skill in my feet. I'll just go and do it." How are you dealing with those players when it comes with the tension of your philosophy?
You have to believe in what you're saying in the first place. So as a coach or as a leader, I think you have to be true to what you've just kind of what I've probably said for the last 20 minutes, and say, this is what I believe. This is what I actually believe is the right way for people to come together, to work as a group, to feel that sense of connection and belonging, but also to be the best possible player they can be. Now, you don't have to drum that into a player. You don't have to, keep beating that drum and get them to believe what you believe. What you have to do is take them down the path, whether they know it or not, and allow them. If someone says that to me, I can't then go back to them and say, no, you're wrong. That's what they believe. So therefore, what I now have to do is align myself with that, but still remember what I actually believe in myself. And say, okay, this person believes, all they need to be is told. Okay, well, let's tell them. But how do we tell them? In what environment do we tell them? Do we actually allow them to tell us first? And then we just repeat that message. Do we allow somebody else in the room to say that message, and then we just repeat that message? So where are these ideas coming from? And in that person just wants to be told, well, okay, tell me what you want to be told. If you're a right back and you just want to be told, what are the 5 things that you need to do as a right back? Okay, tell me what I need to tell you. And let's create that. Let's create that model for that player, and let's get them to buy into that, because I think there are ways and there are techniques of working with that person, even if they're the most obstructive, or they're the most resilient in their thoughts. They really, really do believe in what they're thinking. Okay, not a problem. Let's find a way to work our 2 techniques together and make us both feel like that we're actually going to be successful. And I think that's probably the skill, and that's the way to guide people through.
So, in very simple terms, with the request of just tell me what to do, you're in essence pushing back a little bit by asking what might be considered a divergent question, a question you can't answer. Well, okay, so you want to be told what to do. Well, what things do you want to be told? It's a form of pushback, but a polite form of pushback.
Completely. And I also think there's context to when this happens, because if someone's saying at half time in a game, just tell me what to do, well, that might be the right thing to do. And then that all of a sudden your head coach or you as a leader is looking and saying, okay, in this moment, this is what my player needs. I need to make sure I deliver for them. But actually, if I then take this on to Monday afternoon, when there's not many people left at the training ground, and that person saying to me, tell me what to do, you might have the ability then to take that 15 minutes into 45, or you might have the ability to have this conversation over lunch or in a more relaxed environment. And all of a sudden, you can make this conversation grow. So the pushback for me would need to come at the right time and be delivered in the right way.
You recently stepped into a technical director role, so having a broader lens of the organization, so you're more of a helicopter viewpoint. Did you find that all of these skills that perhaps are used more at the coalface of coaching could be utilized in a position that was more managerial?
Yeah, I do. I really do believe it. And I think if you speak to some of the people who I work with and who are in our team, I think they probably see alignment between what I'm saying now and the way that I worked in at Forest Green as director of football. Um, I think there's a big piece around what we tried to achieve, and that was ultimately to shift the culture. And I think to do that, it did need all of those bits and pieces we spoke about. It did need for us to, empower as many people as possible to create a sense of connection and belonging. And I think to do that, probably even spend more time doing that would probably be something that I would take going forward. It was probably, although I did spend a lot of time, I probably needed to spend even more time really working with the people in the organisation to get a better understanding of their culture as well and embracing that.
Coming full circle back to the explanation you gave us for the success of Brentford was heavily mediated by the vision and the patience around the vision from the key players at Brentford, such as the owner Matthew Benham. In a world that's quite fast paced and tends to be result oriented, that's got to be quite a challenge to find an organization that's going to be patient enough to execute in the manner that you'd like them to consider executing.
It's really hard. It's really, really tough. And I actually feel for any owner or any director of football, sporting director, technical director who's in that environment, because you have to balance those kind of three things: the short, medium, and long term. So yeah, you've got a head coach who, I mean, look at a head coach recently. You lose 5 games and you're gone. So the head coach is only looking game by game to try and get the best out of players in that environment. And then you've got probably a board who are sat there on the completely other side, going. They want to see some financial stability. They want to make sure the club's sustainable. They want to see kind of progress over a period of time. And then as a director of football, you're trying to manage each part of it. So I think to actually be able to go into something with a plan, to stick to that plan and to ride it through the good times and the bad, I think is extremely, extremely tough. But I have a lot of respect for anyone who's able to do it, and but I also have a total understanding of when it's not possible as well.
Just fascinating stuff, Alan. Really, really interesting. Great to see. You borrow from all of your experiences and now have the opportunity to enter at the top end of the organisation and deliver on all the skills that you've learned as a coach. And I agree with you. I mean, I think it's all of these intrapersonal and interpersonal skills are so relevant from a leadership perspective. If we were to differentiate between coaching and leadership. Thank you so much for this conversation, mate. Really interesting. How can people find you, follow you, get in touch if you'd like them to be in touch?
So the only social media I use or platform is LinkedIn. So to use my name on there. Apart from that, I try and stay away from the world of news and social media. So my apologies.
Wise, wise.
Um, yeah. So, but yeah, always happy for people to reach out there. Or if people have a friend in common, then please reach out anytime. I try to be as open as I can.
Brilliant. Alan, thank you so much for today.
Thank you.
Well, everyone, I really enjoyed that episode and I'd love to hear what you, the listener, think. So please do get in touch via Twitter or Facebook or through my website, danabrahams.com, to tell me what you think of the show. And if you do have any suggestions, I'd be delighted to hear them. I'm already looking forward to next week's episode. Bye for now.